गुरुदेव की जय। नितल विष्णु विष्णुपाद शतर शतश्मर शिल भक्तिवेदांत वामन गोसाई महाराज की जय। नितल विष्णु विष्णुपाद शतर शतश्मर शिल भक्तिवेदांत वामन गोसाई महाराज की जय। नितल विष्णु विष्णुपाद शतर शतश्मर शिल भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी महाराज शिल प्रभुपाद की जय। नितल विष्णु विष्णुपाद शतर शतश्मर शिल भक्ति प्रज्ञान केशव गोसाई महाराज की जय। नितल विष्णु विष्णु शतर शतश्मर शिल भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोसाई प्रभुपाद की जय। नितल विश्व महाभागवत शिल अक्षरस बाबूजी महाराज की जय। नितल विश्व शिल सच्चिदानंद भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जय। नितल विश्व वैष्णव सार्वभौम शिल जगन्नाथ दास बाबूजी महाराज की जय। श्री रूप गौरी गुरु वर्ग की जय। श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जी गोपाल पतदास रघुनाथ शार राय रामानंदारी शिव प्रसाद नाम आचार्य श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल व्रज मंडल मथुर वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अभिष्ट प्रदत्त गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंड श्याम कुंड की जय। श्री मुन देवी गंगा देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योग माया की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। समागत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। धन्यवाद प्रणाम प्रद्युम्न प्रभु, माधवी दीदी, इंदिरा माता जी. धन्यवाद प्रणाम to all of you. Okay. Oh God. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Namo Vishnu Padaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Nārāyanaति Namine. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha. Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha. Yam pravrajantam anupetam apeta krityam dvaipayano viraha katara ajuhava putreti tanmayataya taravo bhinedu stang sarvabhuta hridayam munimanatosmi narayanam namaskritya narang chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudiraye. Shrinvatang Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridantasto Hyabhadrani Vidhunoti Suritsatam Nashta Prayashvavadreshu Nityang Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Tavai Vasmi Na Jivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigaya Radhe Tvam Nayamam Charanantikam Bhakta Vihina Aparada Lakshay Kshiptashtakama Ditarangamadhe Kripa Maitam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charana Ravindam. Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. That's so strange. I wonder if I messed up with the numbering with this. Anyhow, yikes. Oh, and yes, Dandava pranams. Yes, I am feeling well rested. Yes. Okay. Anyhow, hopefully I didn't screw up this numbering. What verses are we reading? 19 to 26. 19 to 26. Let's look at this. Bhagavat Subodhini. What's 19 to 26? What verse did we read up to last time? Sorry guys, I didn't have time to prepare it this morning very much. So, okay, last time we read 11 to 18. And wait, are we on, oops, I'm on the wrong chapter. Damn it. Sorry guys. This is what happens when I'm late. Okay. What was it? My mind's not working. Okay, 18. I think we read up to 18. All right. Okay, now we're finishing off this chapter. Oh, Krishna. Okay, let's do a recap of these 19 verses, just because we missed. So Puranjan enjoys with his queen and forgets time. I'm not going to read, because we've read this twice now, I think, so I'm not going to read I'm not going to read the spiritual significance. You can read that on this while I'm reading this. So Puranjan's activity of being enjoyed, being welcomed, being captivated, being illusioned, and then his youth passes. So Puranjan, after bewildering her husband and bringing him under her control, Puranjani gave him all satisfaction and enjoyed with him. The king welcomed his satisfied queen, who approached him. Rukmini, Rukmanjari, are you sure that I finished on verse 26? Or was this a mistake? Because I could have made a mistake here. Because aren't there only 26 verses in this chapter? Oh. Let's see. Did we read this purport? Yavanā, the king of Yavans, could also refuse to accept. Palakanya continued, O gentle one, I am now present before you to serve you. Please accept me and thus show me mercy. It is a gentleman's greatest duty to be compassionate. Okay. Oh God, I'm so sorry guys. Okay. Okay, so then I'm reading from 27. Okay, got it. I'll read from 27. Embraced by the queen and attracted by her private talks, King Puranjan became captivated by her and could not realize the passing of time. In this way, Puranjan always remained in the arms of his wife and could not understand the meaning of self-realization, neither as the jiva nor as the Lord. In this way, Puranjan, with his heart full of lust, began to enjoy sex with his wife, and his youth passed away in half a moment. And his wife he begot 1,100 sons and 110 well-qualified daughters, who gave fame to their parents. In this business he passed half of his life. To increase the descendants of his paternal family, he got his sons married with qualified wives, and his daughters married with qualified husbands. Each son produced hundreds and hundreds of sons. In this way, the whole city of Panchal became overcrowded by his descendants. Note, Panchal Desh refers to the field of activities where the jiva enjoys sense objects. Actions and reactions the jiva generates are represented by sons and grandsons. Puranjan's sons and grandsons were virtually plunders of his home, treasury, servants, secretaries, etc. His attachment to them was deep-rooted. King Puranjan became implicated in so many desires, just like you, Prachina Barhi. He worshipped the demigods, forefathers, and social leaders with various animal sacrifices. Being attached to fruitive activities and family, Puranjan eventually arrived at the point disliked by those overly attached to women. The Gandharva king Chandavega and his 360 powerful Gandharva soldiers, each with a female Gandharvi companion, surrounded and plundered Puranjan's city, built for his sense gratification. So Chandavega represents time, the Gandharvas represent the days, Gandharvis represent the nights. The white pairs of Gandharvas represent the waxing phase of the moon, black pairs of Gandharvas, the waning phase of the moon. Chandavega and his followers surrounded the city and plundered it. That represents that from birth, every day one's lifespan is stolen by time. When Chandavega and his followers began to plunder the city, a five-hooded serpent, the life heir, who was a superintendent of the city, began to defend the city. He fought alone with the 720 Gandharvas for 100 years. Seeing that the serpent had become weak from fighting alone with many powerful soldiers, the king and the citizens became very anxious. King Puranjan fearlessly enjoyed sexual indulgence in the city along with his followers by collecting taxes from the 5 provinces, Panchal, the 5 sense objects. He was completely controlled by women and unable to understand death approaching. Now the entrance of old age, Jarā, is described through a story. The story of Kalakanya, the daughter of Chandavega. At this time, Kalakanya, Jarā, or old age, the daughter of Chandavega, time, was seeking her husband throughout the 3 worlds, but no one agreed to accept her. Because she was fortunate, she was known as Durbhaga, ill-fated. However, once a king, Puru, accepted her, and being pleased, she granted him a benediction. The benediction is that when Yayati was satisfied, the benediction was that when Yayati was satisfied with his son Puru for accepting his old age, he gave him the kingdom. And that's reference is Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 9:18. So Nārada proposes, she proposes to Nārada. She met me once when Nārada speaking, so she met me once when I came to this earth from Brahmaloka. Knowing that I was a brahmachari, she became lusty and proposed that I accept her. When I refused, she became very angry and cursed me that I would not be able to stay in one place for a long time. Disappointed by me, but taking my advice, she approached Bhaya, the king of the Yavanas, and chose him as her husband. Note, Narada's desire in sending Bhaya to Yavana-rāja was, let people's fear be weakened by the influence of old age. Okay. So now this is Kalakanya to Bhaya. She says to Bhaya, I desire you, and Bhaya means fear, yes. Old age says to fear. I desire you, the best of the Yavans. I accept you as my desired husband, for I know that no one is baffled if he makes friends with you. Two types of ignorant people are lamentable, according to the common understanding and the scriptures. 1. Those who do not give charity, and 2. Those who do not accept charity. Therefore, be merciful to me and accept me. It is a gentleman's greatest duty to be compassionate upon a person who is distressed. Hearing this, Bhaya, desiring to execute the Lord's confidential duty, spoke to Kalakanya while smiling. The Lord's desire was to put the wheel of samsara into motion. Okay. Alright, so this is where we read up to 27. And then we have 2 more verses in this chapter. Thanks, Rukmini. Why am I calling you Rukmini? Oh my God. Thanks, Manjari. Kalakanyodita vacha nishamya yavaneshwara chikirshu devagohyam sa sasmitam tam abhashata. After hearing the statement of Kalakanya, the daughter of time, the king of the Yavans began to smile and devise a means for executing his confidential duty on behalf of Providence. He then addressed Kalakanya as follows. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi 5, 142, it is said, Ekale Ishvara Krishna ar sababhrita jare jaiche nachai se tarche kore nrita. Actually, the Supreme Controller is the personality of Godhead, Krishna, and everyone is his servant. Yavana-rāja, the king of the Yavans, was also a servant of Krishna. Consequently, he wanted to execute the purpose of Krishna through the agency of Kalakanya. Although Kalakanya means invalidity or old age, Yavana-rāja wanted to serve Krishna by introducing Kalakanya everywhere. Thus, a sane person by attaining old age will become fearful of death. Foolish people engage in material activities as if they will live forever and enjoy material advancement, but actually, there is no material advancement. Under illusion, people think that material opulence will save them, but although there has been much advancement in material science, the problems of human society, birth, death, old age, and disease, are still unsolved. Nonetheless, foolish scientists are thinking that they have advanced materially. When Kalakanya, the invalidity of old age, attacks them, they become fearful of death, if they are sane. Those who are insane simply do not care for death, nor do they know what is going to happen after death. They are under the wrong impression that after death there is no life, and consequently they act very irresponsibly in this life and enjoy unrestricted sense gratification. For an intelligent person, the appearance of old age is an impetus to spiritual life. People naturally fear impending death. The king of the Yavans tried to utilize Kalakanya for this purpose. Maya nirupitastubhyam patiratma samadhina na bhinandati lokoyam tam abhadram asammatam. The king of the Yavans replied, After much consideration, I have arrived at a husband for you. Actually, as far as everyone is concerned, you are inauspicious and mischievous. Since no one likes you, how can anyone accept you as his wife? That's not very nice. Okay. Purport. After much consideration, the king of the Yavans decided to make the best use of a bad bargain. Kalakanya was a bad bargain, and no one liked her. But everything can be used for the service of the Lord. Thus the king of the Yavans tried to utilize her for some purpose. The purpose has already been explained. That is, Kalakanya, as Jarā, the invalidity of old age, can be used to arouse a sense of fear in people so that they will prepare for the next life by engaging in Krishna consciousness. Tvam avaktya gatir bhungshva lokam karma vinirmitam yahi me pritana yukta prajanasham praneshyasi. This world is a product of fruitive activities. Therefore, you may imperceptibly attack people in general. Helped by my soldiers, you can kill them without opposition. Purport. The word karma vinirmitam means manufactured by fruitive activities. This entire material world, especially in these days, is the result of fruitive activity. Is the result of fruitive activities. Everyone is fully engaged in decorating the world with highways, motor cars, electricity, skyscrapers, industries, businesses, etc. All this appears very nice for those who are simply engaged in sense gratification and who are ignorant of spiritual identity. As described in Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 5.5.4, Nunam pramatta kurute vikarma yadindriya pritaya aprinoti nasadu manye yata atmanoyam asanapi kleshada asadeha. Those without knowledge of the spirit soul are mad after materialistic activities, and they perform all kinds of sinful activities simply for sense gratification. According to Rishabhadev, such activities are inauspicious because they force one to accept an abominable body in the next life. Everyone can experience that although we try to keep the body in a comfortable position, it is always giving pain and is subjected to the threefold miseries. Otherwise, why are there so many hospitals, welfare boards, and insurance establishments? Actually, in this world, there is no happiness. People are simply engaged in trying to counteract unhappiness. Foolish people accept unhappiness as happiness. Therefore, the king of the Yavans decided to attack such foolish people imperceptibly by old age, disease, and ultimately death. Of course, after death, there must be birth. Therefore, Yavana-rāja thought it wise to kill all the karmis through the agency of Kalakanya, and thus tried to make them aware that materialistic advancement is not actually advancement. Every living entity is a spiritual being, and consequently, without spiritual advancement, the human form of life is ruined. Prajvaroyam. I'm just checking the comments really quick. Okay, great, thanks for Prajvaroyam mama bhrata Tvam cha me bhagini bhava charamyu bhavyam lokesmin avyakto bhimasainika. The king of the Yavans continued, "Here is my brother, Prajvara. I now accept you as my sister. I shall employ both of you, as well as my dangerous soldiers, to act imperceptibly within this world." Who's Prajvara? Purport. Kalakanya was sent by Nārada Muni to Yavana-rāja so that she might become his wife. But instead of accepting her as his wife, Yavana-rāja accepted her as his sister. Those who do not follow the Vedic principles are unrestricted as far as sex life is concerned. Consequently, they sometimes do not hesitate to have sex with their sisters. Oh my gosh. Srila Prabhupada has no filter. I mean, I'm not saying it in a bad way. I'm just saying that, yeah, he'll say it. He's not afraid of saying anything. In this age of Kali, there are many instances of such incest. Although Yavana-rāja accepted the request of Nārada Muni to show respect to him, he was nonetheless thinking of illicit sex. This was due to his being the king of the Yavanas and Malechas. The word Prajvara is very significant, for it means the fever sent by Lord Vishnu. Such a fever is always set at 107 degrees, the temperature at which a man dies. Thus the king of the Malechas and Yavanas requested the daughter of time, Kalakanya, to become his sister. There is no need to ask her to become his wife, for the Yavanas and Malechas did not make distinctions as far as sex life is concerned. Thus one may outwardly be a sister, mother, or daughter, and still have sex. Yavana-rāja's brother was Prajvara. And Prajvara means fever, right? Is that what? Because I know in Bengali, Jwara means fever. Yeah, that's what you just said. Okay. Prajvara is very significant. It means the fever sent by Lord Vishnu. Okay. So, Yavan's brother was Prajvara, and Kalakanya was invalidity itself. Combined and strengthened by the soldiers of Yavana-rāja, namely non-hygienic conditions, illicit sex, and ultimately a high degree of temperature to bring on death, they would still be able to smash the materialistic way of life. I don't know why I said still. They would be able to smash the materialistic way of life. In this connection, it is significant that Nārada was immune to the attack of Jarā, or invalidity. And similarly, Jarā, or the destructive force, cannot attack any follower of Nārada Muni or a pure Vaishnav. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 4th canto, 27th chapter of the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, entitled Attack by Chandavega on the City of King Puranjan, and the character of Kalakanya. Now we're beginning chapter 28. Let's see. I messed up preparing this morning. Okay. Okay, so we're reading to verse 27. Well, let's see how far we get. Let's try it, though. Let's try to get to verse 27, because then the next day is 6,207 words. Okay. Let's change this to 28. Puranjan becomes a woman in his next life. Nārada uvacha Sainika Bhaya namno ye parhishman dishtakarina prajvara kalakanyabhyam dicherur avanim imam. The great sage Nārada continued, "My dear king, Prachina Barhishat afterward, the king of the Yavans, whose name is fear itself, as well as Prajvara, Kalakanya, and his soldiers, began to travel all over the world." Purport. The period of life just prior to death is certainly very dangerous because usually at this time, people are attacked by the weakness of old age as well as many kinds of disease. The diseases that attack the body are compared here to soldiers. These soldiers are not ordinary soldiers, for they are guided by the king of the Yavanas, who acts as their commander-in-chief. The word Dishtakarina indicates that he is their commander. When a man is young, he does not care for old age, but enjoys sex to the best of his satisfaction, not knowing that at the end of life, his sexual indulgence will bring on various diseases, which so much disturb the body that one will pray for immediate death. The more one enjoys sex during youth, the more he suffers in old age. Ta ekada turabhasa puranjana purim nripa rurudur bhoma bhogadyam jarat panna gapalitam. Once the dangerous soldiers attacked the city of Puranjan with great force. Although the city was full of paraphernalia for sense gratification, it was being protected by the old serpent. And the old serpent was vital force, right? That's the serpent that was following, Puranjani in the beginning. Purport. As one's body engages in sense gratification, it becomes weaker and weaker daily. Finally, the vital force becomes so weak that it is herein compared to a weak serpent. The life air has already been compared to the serpent. When the vital force within the body becomes weak, the body itself also becomes weak. At such a time, the death symptoms, that is, the dangerous soldiers of death's superintendent Yavana-rāja, begin to attack very severely. According to the Vedic system, before coming to such a stage, one should leave home and take sannyas to preach the message of God for the duration of life. However, if one sits at home and is served by his beloved wife and children, he certainly becomes weaker and weaker due to sense gratification. When death finally comes, one leaves the body devoid of spiritual assets. At the present time, even the oldest man in the family does not leave home, being attracted by wife, children, money, opulence, dwelling, etc. Thus, at the end of life, one worries about how his wife will be protected and how she will manage the great family responsibilities. In this way, a man usually thinks of his wife before death. According to Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajantante kalevaram tang tam avaite konteya sadatar bhava bhavita. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. At the end of life, a person thinks of what he has done throughout his whole life. Thus he gets another body, dehantara, according to his thoughts and desires at the end of life. We don't really have control over what we think at the end of our life, so that's why, anyways. One overly addicted to life at home naturally thinks of his beloved wife at the end of life. Consequently, in the next life, he gets the body of a woman, and he also acquires the results of his pious or impious activities. In this chapter, the acceptance of a woman's body by King Puranjan will be thoroughly explained. Kalakanya pibu bhuje Puranjana puram balat Yayabhi bhuta purusha sadoni saratam kiyat. Gradually, Kalakanya, with the help of dangerous soldiers, attacked all the inhabitants of Puranjan city and thus rendered them useless for all purposes. Purport. At the fag end of life, when the invalidity of old age attacks a man, his body becomes useless for all purposes. Therefore, Vedic training dictates that when a man is in his boyhood, he should be trained in the process of brahmacharya. That is, he should be completely engaged in the service of the Lord and should not in any way associate with women. When the boy becomes a young man, he marries between the ages of 20 and 25. When he is married at the right age, he can immediately beget strong, healthy sons. Now, female descendants are increasing because young men are very weak sexually. A male child will be born if the husband is sexually stronger than the wife, but if the female is stronger, a female child will be born. Thus, it is essential to practice a system of brahmacharya if one wishes to beget a male child when one is married. When one reaches the age of 50, he should give up family life. At that time, one's child should be grown up so that the father can leave the family responsibilities to him. The husband and wife may then go abroad to live a retired life and travel to different places of pilgrimage. When both the husband and wife lose their attachment for family and home, the wife returns home to live under the care of her grown-up children and to remain aloof from family affairs. The husband then takes sannyas to render some service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the perfect system of civilization. The human form of life is especially meant for God realization. If one is unable to take to the process of Krishna consciousness from the very beginning of life, he must be trained to accept these principles at the fag end of life. Unfortunately, there is no training even in childhood, nor can one give up his family life even at the end. This is the situation within the city of Puranjan, figuratively described in these verses. Tayopabhujamanam vai Yavana sarvato disham darbhi pravishya subhrisham prardayam sakalam purim. When Kalakanya, daughter of time, attacked the body, the dangerous soldiers of the king of the Yavans entered the city through different gates. They then began to give severe trouble to all the citizens. Purport. The body has 9 gates: 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, mouth, rectum, and genitals. When one is harassed by the invalidity of old age, various diseases manifest at the gates of the body. For example, the eyes become so dim that one requires spectacles, and the ears become too weak to hear directly, and therefore one requires hearing aids. The nostrils are blocked by mucus, and one has to always sniff a medicinal bottle containing ammonia. Similarly, the mouth, too weak to chew, requires false teeth. The rectum also gives one trouble, and the evacuation process becomes difficult. Sometimes one has to take enemas, and sometimes use a surgical nozzle to accelerate the passing of urine. In this way, the city of Puranjan was attacked at various gates by the soldiers. Thus, in old age, all the gates of the body are blocked by so many diseases, and one has to take help from so many medicines and surgical appliances. Tasyam prapedyamanayam abhimani puranjana avaporo vidhangstapam kutumbi mamatakula. When the city was thus endangered by the soldiers in Kalakanya, King Puranjan, being overly absorbed in affection for his family, was placed in difficulty by the attack of Yavana-rāja in Kalakanya. Purport. When we refer to the body, we include the external gross body with its various limbs, as well as the mind, intelligence, and ego. In old age, these all become weak when they are attacked by different diseases. The proprietor of the body, the living soul, becomes very sad at not being able to use the field of activities properly. In Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly explained that the living entity is the proprietor of this body, kshetragya, and that the body is the field of activities, kshetra. When a field is overgrown with thorns and weeds, it becomes very difficult for the owner to work it. That is the position of the spirit soul when the body itself becomes a burden due to disease. Extra burdens are placed on the body in the form of anxiety and general deterioration of the bodily functions. Kanyapagura nashta shri kripano vishayatmaka nashta pragya hritaishwaryo Gandharva Yavanar-balat. When King Puranjan was embraced by Kalakanya, he gradually lost all his beauty. Having been too much addicted to sex, he became very poor in intelligence and lost all his opulence. Being bereft of all possessions, he was conquered forcibly by the Gandharvas and the Yavanas. Purport. When a person is attacked by the invalidity of old age and is still addicted to sense gratification, he gradually loses all his personal beauty, intelligence, and good possessions. He thus cannot resist the forceful attack of the daughter of time. Vishirnam swapurim vikshya pratikulananadritan putranugamatyan Jayancha Gatasohridam. King Puranjan then saw that everything in his town was scattered, and that his sons, grandsons, servants, and ministers were all gradually opposing him. He also noted that his wife was becoming cold and indifferent. Purport. When one becomes an invalid, his senses and organs are weakened. In other words, they are no longer under one's control. The senses and sense objects then begin to oppose him. When a person is in a distressed condition, even his family members, his sons, grandsons, and wife, become disrespectful. They no longer are under the command of the master of the house. Just as we wish to use our senses for sense gratification, the senses also require strength from the body in reciprocation. A man keeps a family for enjoyment, and similarly, family members demand enjoyment from the head of the family. When they do not receive sufficient money from him, they grow disinterested and ignore his commands or desires. This is all due to one's being a kripana, a miser. The word kripana, used in the 6th verse, is in opposition to the word Brahman. In the human form of life, one should become a Brahman, which means that one should understand the constitutional position of the absolute truth, Brahman, and then engage in his service as a Vaishnava. We get this facility in the human form of life, but if we do not properly utilize this opportunity, we become a kripana, a miser. A miser is one who gets money but does not spend it properly. This human form of life is especially meant for understanding Brahman, for becoming it's meant for understanding Brahman, for becoming a Brahman. And if we do not utilize it properly, we remain a kripana. We can actually see that when one has money but does not spend it, he remains a miser and is never happy. Similarly, when one's intelligence is spoiled due to sense gratification, he remains a miser throughout his life. Atmanam kanyaya grastam panchalan aridoshitam duranta chintamappanno na lebhe tat pratikriyam. When King Puranjan saw that all his family members, relatives, followers, servants, secretaries, and everyone else had turned against him, he certainly became very anxious. But he could not counteract the situation because he was thoroughly overwhelmed by Kalakanya. Purport. When a person becomes weak from the attack of old age, the family members, servants, and secretaries do not care for him. He is then unable to counteract this. Thus he becomes more and more anxious and laments his frightful condition. Kamam abhilashandina yatayamangscha kanyaya vigatatma gati sneha putra darangschalalayan. The objects of enjoyment became stale by the influence of Kalakanya. Due to the continuance of his lusty desires, King Puranjan became very poor in everything. Thus he did not understand the aim of life. He was still very affectionate towards his wife and children, and he worried about maintaining them. Purport. This is exactly the position of present civilization. Everyone is engaged in maintaining the body, home, and family. Consequently, everyone becomes confused at the end of life, not knowing what spiritual life and the goal of human life are. In a civilization of sense gratification, there cannot be spiritual life, because a person thinks only of this life. Although the next life is a fact, no information is given about it. Gandharva Yavana-krantam Kalakanyo pamarditam Hantum prachakrame raja Tampurim anikabmata. The city of King Puranjan was overcome by the Gandharva and Yavan soldiers, and although the king had no desires to leave the city, he was circumstantially forced to do so, for it was smashed by Kalakanya. Purport. The living entity separated from the association of the Supreme Personality of Godhead tries to enjoy this material world. He is given a chance to enjoy it in a particular type of body, beginning with the body of a Brahma down to that of the microbe. From the Vedic history of creation, we can understand that the first living creature was Lord Brahma, who created the 7 great sages and other Prajapatis to increase the universal population. Thus, every living entity, according to karma, his past desires and activities, gets a particular type of body, from that of Brahma to that of a microbe or a germ and stool. Due to long association with a particular type of material body, and also due to the grace of Kalakanya and her Maya, one becomes overly attached to the material body, although it is the abode of pain. Even if one tries to separate a worm from stool, the worm will be unwilling to leave. It will return to the stool. Similarly, a hog generally lives in a very filthy state, eating stool. But if one tries to separate it from its condition and give it a nice place, the hog will be unwilling. In this way, if we study each and every living entity, we will find that he will defy offers of a more comfortable position. Although King Puranjan was attacked from all sides, he was unwilling to leave the city. In other words, the living entity, whatever his condition, does not want to give up the body. But he will be forced to give it up because, after all, this material body cannot exist forever. The living entity wishes to enjoy the material world in different ways, and therefore, by nature's law, he is allowed to transmigrate from one body to another, exactly as a person transmigrates from the body of an infant to a child, to a boy, to a youth, to a man. This process is constantly going on. At the last stage, when the gross body becomes old and invalid. Do you say invalid or invalid? I think invalid, right? Yeah. The living entity is reluctant to give it up, despite the fact that it is no longer usable. Although material existence and the material body are not comfortable, why does the living entity not want to leave? As soon as one gets a material body, he has to work very hard to maintain it. He may engage in different fields of activity, but whatever the case, Everyone has to work very hard to maintain the material body. Unfortunately, society has no information of the soul's transmigration. Because the living entity does not hope to enter the spiritual kingdom of eternal life, bliss, and knowledge, he wants to stick to his present body, even though it may be useless. Consequently, the greatest welfare activity in this material world is the furthering of the Krishna consciousness movement. This movement is giving human society information about the kingdom of God. There is God, there is Krishna, and everyone can return to God and live eternally in bliss and knowledge. A Krishna-conscious person is not afraid of giving up the body, because his position is always eternal. A Krishna-conscious person engages in the transcendental loving service of the Lord eternally. Therefore, as long as he lives within the body, he is happy to engage in the loving service of the Lord. And when he gives up the body, he is also permanently situated in the service of the Lord. The saintly devotees are always free and liberated, whereas the karmis, who have no knowledge of spiritual life or the transcendental loving service of the Lord, are very much afraid of giving up the rotten material body. Bhavanamna grajo prata prajvara pratipastita tadahatam purim kritsnam bratu priya chikirshaya. Under the circumstances, the elder brother of Yavana-rāja, known as Prajvara, set fire to the city to please his younger brother, whose other name is Fear itself. Purport. According to the Vedic system, a dead body is set on fire. But before death there is another fire, or fever, which is called Prajvara, or Vishnu Dwar. Medical science verifies that when one's temperature is raised to 107 degrees, a man immediately dies. This Prajvara, or higher fever, at the last stage of life, places the living entity in the midst of a blazing fire. Tasyam sandahyamanayam sapora saparichada kautumbika kutumbinya apatapyatasanvaya. When the city was set ablaze, all the citizens and servants of the king, as well as all family members, sons, grandsons, wives, and other relatives, were within the fire. King Puranjan thus became very unhappy. Purport. There are many parts of the body, the senses, the limbs, the skin, the muscles, blood, marrow, etc. And all these are considered here figuratively as sons, grandsons, citizens, and dependents. When the body is attacked by the Vishnu Dwar, the fiery condition becomes so acute that sometimes one remains in a coma. This means that the body is in such severe pain that one becomes unconscious and cannot feel the miseries taking place within the body. Indeed, the living entity becomes so helpless at the time of death that, although unwilling, he is forced to give up the body and enter another. In Bhagavad Gita it is stated that man may, by scientific advancement, improve the temporary living conditions, but that he cannot avoid the pains of birth, old age, disease, and death. These are under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the agency of material nature. A foolish person cannot understand this simple fact. Now people are very busy trying to find petroleum in the midst of the ocean. They are very anxious to make provisions for the future petroleum supply, but they do not make any attempts to ameliorate, I don't know that word, ameliorate, which means make something bad or unsatisfactory better. Okay. But they do not make any attempts to ameliorate the conditions of birth, old age, disease, and death. Thus a person in ignorance, not knowing anything about his own future life, is certainly defeated in all his activities. Yavana-rāja grastayam kalakanyaya puryam prajvara sangsrishta purapalon vatapyata. The city's superintendent of police, the serpent, saw that the citizens were being attacked by Kalakanya, and he became very aggrieved to see his own residence set ablaze after being attacked by the Yavanas. Purport. The living entity is covered by two different types of bodies, the gross body and the subtle body. At death we can see that the gross body is finished, but actually the living entity is carried by the subtle body to another gross body. The so-called scientists of the modern age cannot see how the subtle body is working in carrying the soul from one body to another. This subtle body has been figuratively described as a serpent, or the city's police superintendent. When there is fire everywhere, the police superintendent cannot escape either. When there is security and an absence of fire in the city, the police superintendent can impose his authority upon the citizens. But when there is an all-out attack on the city, he is rendered useless. As the life air was ready to leave the gross body, the subtle body also began to experience pain. Na sheke sovitum tatra puru krichro ruve patu gantum aichat tato vriksha kotaradi vasanalat. As a serpent living within the cavity of a tree wishes to leave when there is a forest fire, so the city's police superintendent, the snake, wished to leave the city due to the fire's severe heat. Purport. It becomes very difficult for snakes to live in a forest when there is a fire. Other animals may flee due to their long legs, but serpents, only being able to crawl, are generally burnt in the fire. At the last stage, the limbs of the body are not as much affected as the life air. Shitalavayavo yarhi Gandharvar Hritaporusha Yavana-rāja uparudorurodaha. The limbs of the serpent's body were slackened by the Gandharvas and Yavan soldiers, who had thoroughly defeated his bodily strength. When he attempted to leave the body, he was checked by his enemies. Being thus baffled in his attempt, he began to cry loudly. Purport. At the last stage of life, the different gates of the body are choked by the effects of disease, which are caused by an imbalance of bile, mucus, and air. Thus, the living entity cannot clearly express his difficulties, and surrounding relatives hear the sound gur gur from a dying man. In his Mukunda Mala Stotra, King Kulashekar states, or maybe it's more like gur, like that. Krishna tadiya parapankaja panjarantam adaiva me vishatumana saraja hangsa prana prayana samaye kapabata pita kanta varodhana vidho smaranam kutaste. My dear Krishna, please help me die immediately so that the swan of my mind may be encircled by the stem of your lotus feet. Otherwise, at the time of my final breath, when my throat is choked up, how will it be possible for me to think of you? The swan takes great pleasure in diving within the water and being encircled by the stem of the lotus flower. This entanglement is sporting joy. If, in our healthy condition, we think of the lotus feet of the Lord and die, it is most fortunate. In old age, at the time of death, the throat becomes choked with mucus or blocked by air. At such a time, the sound vibration of Hare Krishna, the Mahamantra, may not come out. Thus, one may forget Krishna. Of course, those who are strong in Krishna consciousness cannot possibly forget Krishna in any stage because they are accustomed to chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, especially when there's a signal from death. Tu hritrim putra potranscha jami jamatri parshadan svatva vashishtam yat kinchir kriha koshra parichadam. King Puranjan then began to think of his daughters, sons, grandsons, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, servants, and other associates, as well as his house, his household paraphernalia, and his little accumulation of wealth. Purport. It is not infrequent for a person overly attached to the material body to request a physician to prolong his life at least for some time. If the so-called scientific physician is able to prolong one's life for a few minutes through the use of oxygen or other medicines, he thinks that he is very successful in his attempts, although ultimately the patient will die. This is called the struggle for existence. At the time of death, both patient and physician still think of prolonging life, although all the constituents of the body are practically dead and gone. Aham mameti swikritya griheshu kumatir grihi dadhyo pramadayadina viprayoga upastite. Okay, I think I'm probably going to end with this verse, because it's already 8 o'clock, I think. King Puranjan was overly attached to his family and conceptions of I and mine. Because he was overly attracted to his wife, he was already quite poverty-stricken. At the time of separation, he became very sorry. Purport. It is clear in this verse that at the time of death, thoughts of material enjoyments do not go away. This indicates that the living entity, the soul, is carried by the subtle body, mind, intelligence, and ego. Due to false ego, the living entity still wants to enjoy the material world, and for want of material enjoyment, he becomes sorry or sad. He still makes intellectual plans to further his existence, and therefore, although he gives up the gross body, he is carried by the subtle body to another gross body. The transmigration of the subtle body is never visible to material eyes. Therefore, when one gives up the gross body, we can think that he is finished. Plans for material enjoyment are made by the subtle body, and the gross body is the instrument for enjoying these plans. Thus, the gross body can be compared to the wife, for the wife is the agent for all kinds of sense gratification. Because of long association with the gross body, the living entity becomes very sad to be separated from it. The mental activity of the living entity obliges him to accept another gross body and continue his material existence. The Sanskrit word stri means expansion. Through the wife, one expands his various objects of attraction, sons, daughters, grandsons, and so on. Attachment to family members becomes very prominent at the time of death. One often sees that just before leaving his body, a man may call for his beloved son to give him charge of his wife and other paraphernalia. He may say, "My dear boy, I am being forced to leave. Please take charge of the family affairs." He speaks in this way, not even knowing his destination. Okay, let's see what we'll read tomorrow. Puranjan's lamentation about wife and children, and being attacked by Bhaya. Puranjan dies, and after death, animals attack him. Alright. Gonna have to reschedule all these days I set up. Oh my god. Like I set up for the rest of this month, but anyhow, whatever. I'll work it out. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hare Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hare Bol. Sorry, we're right on track. Okay, so there's no problem. We aren't behind or anything. That's perfect. Alright. Jai Shishi Guru Guranga Gandharvika Giridhari Shishi Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju Ki Jai Nitil Pavishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Srila Gurudev Ki Jai. Nitil Pavishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Srila Gurudev Ki Jai. Nitil Pavishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pavishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitil Pavishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhakti Vigyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pavishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitil Pavishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada Ki Jai. Sai. Nitil Pavishtam Bhagavat Srila Gorkshara Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitil Pavishtam Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai. Nitil Pavishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Rupanu Gauriya Guru Varga Ki Jai. Shri Rup Sanatan Pata Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Patadasha Guna Shad Gosai Prabhu Ki Jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Braja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund Ki Jai. Shri Yamuna Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Brinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Purnamasi Yoga Maya Ki Jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavascha Krishna Bhakti Padadevi Satyapatai Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyashta Kripa Sindhu Bhyayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Dandavat pranams. On my computer it shows the sound bar, so I think my sound is still on. I mean, it shows the volume thing moving. So anyways, sorry today I started really late, and so I didn't prepare very nicely, and that's why it was all a little bit of a mess, but we managed to get our full quota of reading today, even though we went a little bit over time. Anyhow, thanks for being patient. Dandavat pranams. Haribol. And yeah, Rup Manjari, it looks like the sound is working. Okay, Haribol.